Today is February 13th. It's the 44th day of the year, and this is the On This Day podcast. If you've been listening from the start, some of this may sound a little familiar, and if you haven't, it'll all be new to you. Either way, enjoy the show. So we're going to talk about the Beatles again today. No, I'm not going to turn the show into On This Day in Beatles history, but I am a fan. And today is the third of three significant days in this week in the Beatles' career. You recall a couple days ago, February 11th, 1963, they record their first album, 10 songs in one day. That album, Please Please Me, hits number one on the UK charts and stays there until it's knocked off by their second album, With the Beatles. Then on February 9th, 1964, they make their historic first appearance in the US on The Ed Sullivan Show. Just 2.5 years later, at the end of August 1966, they play their last concert on tour. Sometimes I'm astounded by how much they did in such a short amount of time. These days, if a singer or band signs a record deal, they'll spend 4 years recording and touring their first album. By the summer of 1966, 4 years after the Beatles signed their record deal with EMI, they've released 7 albums and decided to give up touring for good. In those 4 years, they've also revolutionized the way music is recorded. They still record inside the same room, EMI Studio 2, but the regimental protocol that we talked about the other day, that's been thrown out the window. No more 3-hour blocks of studio time. By 1966, the group is recording for 10, 12, 14 hours straight, in whatever time of day or night they want. They no longer refrain from entering the control room. In fact, they now have a direct hand in the sonic quality of their songs, urging engineers Norman Smith and later Geoff Emerick to push recording equipment beyond its designed limits. They essentially play the recording studio as an instrument. And they no longer record songs in a couple of takes, banging out 3 or 4 complete songs a day, or 10 songs like they did in February of 1963. By 1966, their songs generally get multiple overdubs, adding layers of instruments, voices, and sound effects recorded across a couple of days. At the end of that year, 1966, the Beatles record a song that is the culmination of all the recording techniques they've learned, discovered, and invented in Studio 2 over the past 4 years. That song, Strawberry Fields Forever, is released in the US as a double A-side with Penny Lane on this day in 1967. It's released 4 days later in the UK. At the end of August 1966, the Beatles finish what they've decided will be their final tour. They take a break for a few months and go their separate ways. John Lennon goes to Spain to star in the film How I Won the War. While there, he writes a new song, Strawberry Fields Forever. Meanwhile, Paul McCartney has been working on his song Penny Lane in bits and pieces for over a year, and in the fall of 1966, he sets his mind to completing it. Independent of each other, they both choose to write about their hometown Liverpool, referencing locations from their youth. The songs are both part nostalgia and part self-reflection, looking back on who they were before this crazy ride that is the Beatles takes off like a rocket into the stratosphere. After a 2-month break, the Beatles reconvene at EMI Studios to begin work on their next album. Unlike any of their previous albums, they embark on this project knowing that there is no set release date looming over them, and that they will never perform these songs live. The first song they begin working on in the evening of November 24th, 1966, is John's new song, Strawberry Fields. As is custom, John first plays the song on acoustic guitar for producer George Martin, who later recalls that the song was absolutely lovely. The acoustic performance is simple, poignant, and moving. Throughout the next month, the song will become the most complex recording they have ever made. Work begins that night in 1966 with Paul playing a new instrument that John has picked up. A mellotron. It's a sound effects device containing tape loops triggered by a keyboard that can imitate the sound of other instruments. On that night, they use a flute sound for the gentle, memorable first chords of the song. And they run the tape recording machine slightly slower than normal, so it will sound faster when played back at normal speed. It's a technique they've used on a few songs before. This version of the song is unlike anything they've ever recorded before, but it will never be heard outside the walls of Studio 2. They begin working on a different version 4 days later, and a few days after that, John is still not happy with the direction of the song. So they take a new approach. In all, they will spend 8 days recording multiple versions of the song over the course of a month. Versions that are mellow, aggressive, at different speeds, with backwards cymbals, groaning cellos, strident trumpets, John muttering cranberry sauce for reasons that are never known, tom-toms and timpani, and a sword mandel, an Indian instrument similar to a table harp. After all of this, John still isn't satisfied. He likes 2 very different versions of the song, one lighter and contemplative, and the other intense and thunderous. So he asks George Martin to piece the beginning of one to the end of the other. While John is a musical genius, he is also technologically illiterate. The 2 versions are in 2 different keys and at 2 different tempos, George Martin tells him. But being technologically illiterate also means that John's creativity is not bound by technology's limits. So John replies, "Well, you can fix it." If it were today, this would be a simple keystroke in digital editing software. But back in the 1960s, it isn't that easy. However, after carefully reviewing the 2 versions, Martin and engineer Jeff Emmerich determined that if they slow one version down and speed the other up just a bit, adjusting the speed of the tape machine as the 2 pieces join, by some miracle they fit. And in the 50 years since Strawberry Fields Forever is released on this day in 1967, probably very few people ever actually noticed the edit. I'll play it for you now, but you'll never hear this song the same way again once you know where the edit is. So if you don't want to know, go ahead and fast forward about 45 seconds right now. The edit comes 60 seconds into the song between the words "I'm" and "going" in the line, "Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to."
Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to Strawberry Fields. Nothing is real, and nothing to get hung about. Strawberry Fields Forever.
There are 322 days left in the year.